When you find yourself stuck in a project you care deeply about, it can be so tempting to try to force your way forward. But y'all, this is the worst advice, not only because it's not going to help you move forward in your book in any meaningful or sustainable way, but also because it's very likely to make your finished product worse. And that's why I want to encourage you today to retire the phrase push through. And we're going to talk about why. Stay tuned. If you've been working on your memoir for a while, but you're not making the progress you want to make, I want to offer you something really practical. The Memoir Method Checklist is going to lay out every single step in the process from idea to finished book. And I know what you're thinking, a checklist? But truly, if you don't know what you're supposed to be doing next, there is very little chance you're going to actually do it. So this checklist will guide your way through not only making a plan, but then executing the plan all the way through holding that book in your hands. You can download it for free at pageandpodium.com/checklist. This topic has been on my docket for a while, and if you are somebody that is a member of the Memoir Method, if you have worked with me, you will not be surprised to hear me talking about this issue in today's podcast episode. One of the things that was really common to my own writing process, but also a lot of the people that I was around when I was an academic, was that there was very much a sense that you should be pushing yourself all the time, that you were defending your writing time, and part of that defense was that when your writing time came, you were butt in seat and you were moving those fingers as fast as you could, and you better be productive, right? I know that that is not exclusive to academia. I am very aware that actually every high-achieving field, every field that takes a lot of diligence and dedication to get to a high-up level, always is going to come with some temptation to push ourselves, to be productive at all costs. And one thing that really changed for me in a pretty noticeable way, not only to my clients, but to my friends and family as well, was that the longer I was doing this work of working with first-time authors, working with memoirists, running Page and Podium Press, the more clear it became to me that this idea of pushing through is antithetical to good work. Now, let me break that down because I suspect there will be at least some resistance to that idea, but I promise this is grounded in the data of all the people I have ever worked with, dozens of people, maybe hundreds at this point. And this is something that we see consistently across the board. Now, the way I want to break this down is by giving you one of these binaries that we really base everything at Page and Podium on, keeping them in balance. There's 3 of them, and one of them is the idea of process balancing with product. Now here, when I'm talking about product, I'm talking about your actual end result. So the book that you would hold in your hand, it's already been written, revised, edited, designed, produced, and circulated, and you've got it in your hand. Now, I don't want anyone to think, because I'm telling you not to push yourself, that I want that book to be anything less than excellent. That is not true. I actually love an excellent book. And one of the real foundations of Page and Podium was that I wanted to make the publishing excellence that the traditional publishers can bring, although do they always? I don't know, to everyday people, to people that don't feel like they want to try for a Penguin Random House or Simon & Schuster book, to people that are building something very real with audience members that they are connected with, who are trying to build often a new life, to see something better for themselves in terms of thought leadership, in terms of speaking, all of these amazing ways that we change the world that deserve the same treatment of the highest quality traditional press. That is what I set out to do with this press, and I am proud to say we achieve it every single day. So that is to say, your product should be excellent. But at Page and Podium, we know from my experience that when we're thinking about an excellent product, that almost always is going to go hand in hand with an excellent process. Now, what do I mean by that? Because I think sometimes people hear me say product versus process and assume that by process, I mean some kind of touchy-feely, soft thing where we should all be butterflies and flowers and rainbows. You know, I actually love butterflies, flowers, and rainbows, so I'm not against that idea. But when I talk about process, I'm talking about the real psychology of how our work is better in every single arena when we enjoy what we're doing. Now, this doesn't mean that we're never sitting in discomfort. In fact, I talk a lot on this channel and elsewhere about how important it is to build our capacity for discomfort, to build our capacity for the unknown, for the uncertain. That is part of this process that I'm describing. So I don't mean that process always needs to feel good. What I mean is we should have the same high standards for our products and the same high standards for our process. And somehow in this culture we live in, we have gotten this totally twisted, where we very often think the product matters and the process does not matter at all as long as the product comes out. But what I want to tell you is the product's going to be better if the process is better. Okay, so with that said, let's jump into it. I've got some thoughts that I want to talk through that I think are going to clarify how you want to think about your own process, whether that is a supported process, similar to what we do in the memoir method, our group program for women writing their memoirs, or whether you're working on your own or with some other support system. So the first thing I want to say is, why is it that a better process is going to lead to a better product? On the surface, that doesn't seem like it should be true. And yet, again, I have seen this over and over. And the reason is, when we think about that beautiful finished product, particularly when we're thinking in the arts and craft realm, things like memoir, but also things like paintings or drawings, things like films, theater, all of these artistic venues that we might take, all of these products are only a product insofar as it's marketable because it's a product that is expressive. What we aim to do when we write a memoir is express these feelings deep inside of us. And I know it is a little crass and a little gross out, but I had this conversation with a consult the other day, and I thought it made a lot of sense. She was saying, I have got to get this out of me. I have to get this story out. And I said, it's expression, right? It's the same way that if you go get a facial, they do expressions, right? They pop your pimples. That is what you are doing with creative expression. And sometimes it feels similarly as though it's wrenching out of us. We have to pull it out. And the reason is that when we're developing these creative products, one of the things that is inevitably happening is that as that product is being produced, we are changing. There is so much growth and healing and understanding and meaning that happens when you are writing your first memoir. And all of that stuff matters. And all of that stuff is the mechanics, the almost physiological mechanics, honestly, of getting the creativity out of you. Now, the woman that I was talking to had quite a traumatic story, and this is quite common in our company. I speak with a lot of people that have very, very heavy stories that they're trying to tell. And I want to point that out because I think it's often easy to overlook the fact that even when we are writing a very heavy, very traumatic memoir, we still have to work from the root of creativity. And the root of creativity, y'all, it's joy. When we think about process and product, the thing we are aiming for in that process is enjoyment. And of course, if you have done a project, art or not, and enjoyed it, you will know that it is much, much easier to complete something that you are having a good time doing than it is to complete something that you hate. And I bring that up because when we're writing about trauma, I find that often we lose that step. When we're writing about something heavy or something that feels very, very important, we almost feel like we shouldn't have fun. We almost feel like we shouldn't enjoy it, or it's weird to say that we would enjoy it or have fun or get joy from it. But creativity is quite literally pulling out your soul. We are offering these things to others as our form of creative expression. And I truly believe, whatever your spirituality or religion is in this world, that the heart of every single human is this quest for joy. That is what is going to make your reader connect with your story, because it's what will make you connect with your story. And there is nothing more important than feeling that sense of joy. So when I am talking about all of this idea of pushing through, the main thing that I'm really encouraging you to do is pull back the sense that the product, the productivity, is the most important thing. Because truly, the most important thing is that you find joy in the process. Not only to help yourself actually get the thing done, but also because it will be so much better if the reader can see on the page that you are joyfully expressing to them what you went through. Yes, even if it's heavy. Yes, even if it is awful. There is always still a sense that there is joy in community. There is joy in connection. There is joy in this process of expression. Now, I've hinted at one of the main, I think most convincing arguments for what I'm saying here already, but I want to make it really explicit. And that argument is, if you are going through the process of producing anything and you hate it, you are very, very likely not to finish. Now, what are some of the things that we push through? Well, I push through cleaning the house. I'm not a really big fan of cleaning the house. I like to kind of keep my house as clean as possible so I can just push through, get it clean, not have to take a lot of time on that. I often will push through things like obligatory events, those kinds of things that you've got to go. It's an obligation, but you just don't want to be there. Push through, put on a smiling face, you can get through it. We do not push through things that we want to do. And typically, we don't push through things that we really, really value in our heart. Usually, if we're pushing through something, it is some kind of signal from our body or mind that we do not want to do it. And I bring this up because this, of course, goes double, triple, infinity for a memoir. In a memoir, you are not only writing a long form piece of writing, which most of the people I chat with have not done this before at all in any format, but even if you have, a long form project like a book is always challenging, no matter how many you have done. Take my word for it. But the other thing about a memoir is it actually is quite challenging just in terms of the content. Even if your book isn't about a trauma, I guarantee there will be at least a chapter or 4 that's going to be really hard for you to write, just simply because you are revisiting a part of your past that you had pretty intentionally cleaved yourself off from, that you had pretty intentionally, very often, tried to not think about. And guess what? Now you have to get in there. You've got to do that work. Well, if we are pushing through, there is no way you're going to be able to do that. At some point, you will just simply run out of steam. There's only so much that we can force ourselves to do through things like accountability or whatever we might think of. We have to find a way to want to do the work because the work's hard. The work is personal. The work is vulnerable. The work feels as though we are exposing ourselves because we are. So, when we think about process versus product, and when we think about this idea of push through, the most convincing argument I find for most people is that if you are in this mindset of pushing through, you are very likely not to finish. So I want you to keep that in mind as you're moving through your project whenever you are tempted to push through. Now, I want to add on here, and I want to give you some practical ways that you can more productively tackle this issue. Because while I do not believe that you should be pushing through, that you should force yourself to take the next step, I also do know that writing isn't easy. There's never going to be a situation in which every single writing time feels great and you're excited about it and you can't wait to sit down. It's just not realistic. Most of us are going to have ebbs and flows in the amount of energy and passion and joy that we bring to the process. And that is okay. But here's what I want to urge you to do. Rather than pushing through, I want you to dig deeper. What if instead of pushing through, you figured out what it was that was making you feel like you needed to push through? What's holding you back? What's creating these issues for you? What if instead of pushing through on top of those issues, instead we figured out how we could make it feel like ease? We figured out how the process did not have to be pushing, but could rather be leaning through, floating through. So let's talk about some of the ways we might do that. First of all, we've got to figure out where this idea of pushing through is coming from. And there are a few culprits that I see a lot. The first one is this idea of accountability. Now, very often I will see folks who have set a kind of arbitrary date initially for the completion of their memoir. Oftentimes this will be a birthday. Sometimes it's the end of the year. Sometimes it's the end of a school year if you have kids and know it's going to be difficult to make progress when they're running around the house. Whatever this is, I often see that people will feel like they need to back up that arbitrary deadline they have set for themselves with accountability. Now, I'm putting this in scare quotes, but I want to be really clear that I actually do believe in accountability. I think accountability is one of the most important things we can do for ourselves as writers, as artists, as anybody, frankly. And it is a foundational piece of our Memoir Method group program. Every single week, twice a week, we ask all of our members how they are doing. But one important thing is, when we ask folks how they're doing, again, we do this twice a week. We don't just ask folks how they are doing and then beat them over the head if they're not doing as well as they thought. Instead, with our accountability, we ask them how they're doing, and then we figure out why. If it's not what they wanted, we've got to figure out how to treat the symptom. We've got to recognize that actually not having your path be completely linear and clear is the most normal thing there is. And it's for this reason that one of the things that I very often say is that accountability without kindness is just bullying. And y'all, seriously think about that. When we think about accountability that is totally high stakes, that has no flexibility or room for humanity, all you are doing is bullying yourself. And I find very often that when folks set these kind of arbitrary deadlines to have their product done, it very often comes along with this type of bullying that you set this date, you're going to finish by this date. Well, friends, let me ask you to back up a little bit. Let me ask you what it was about that date that made it so magical. Because what I would contend is setting an arbitrary deadline is actually a great idea, but only if when you reach it, you evaluate what it has done for you. Sometimes an accountability deadline will actually get you to the finish line. But sometimes when you set that deadline, you just simply did not know enough about the road in front of you. Sometimes that deadline was just not realistic. And the reason often is that there are steps in the process that you didn't anticipate. Now, I've mentioned some of those before. Some of those are things like working through particular past issues, even stirring the memory enough that you can write about it. Well, I find that almost zero first-time authors account for the types of work they're going to have to do that is not actually words on the page. So what happens then when you get to this arbitrary deadline and you're not done? Well, I want you to stop beating yourself up, stop telling yourself to push through and finish the whole book in a week, and remind yourself instead that the accountability you set actually worked. If you're still looking at that deadline and it is still motivating you, you've got it. That is the formula. So now what you got to do is the same thing again. You've got more information now. We now realize that we're not hitting that date. Well, what's the new one? It is no shame at all to move your own goalpost if that is what needs to happen. So, no, we're not going to push through. Nope, we're not going to speed write. Nope, we're not doing these things in the name of quote unquote accountability, because that's not what accountability is. Accountability is reflecting on what you have done, what was good about it, and what you'd like to improve, and then moving forward with an actual plan to address those things. So, if you are an accountability person and pushing through is something that goes along with that, I want you to rethink that mental framework of what accountability means. It does not need to, and it should not be about bullying yourself, punishing yourself, beating yourself up. That will take you nowhere. And in fact, you're very likely to never finish if you get too stuck in that mindset. The second culprit that I very often see in this kind of beating ourselves up, pushing through, is the idea that we've got some big goal. It's not necessarily associated with a deadline, but that it feels like it's kind of urgent. Now, a lot of the people that I work with, as I've mentioned earlier, I've mentioned often on this podcast, oftentimes they are aiming for some kind of a larger outcome from their book. So yes, they want to write a book, they want to publish an excellent book, but typically this is part of a tool. At the baseline level, it's a tool to reach other people, often people who are going through something that they have overcome. I love that. That is actually the goal that I built this entire company on. But sometimes it also is about reaching those people through something that you want for yourself. And that is great. So this can look like building a speaking career. I'd like to have a book so that I can use it to leverage better paying speaking gigs so that I can have a little bit easier way into some of the big platforms that I want. Sometimes it looks like thought leadership. I want to be out there with my book. I want to be talking to people, and I feel like I will have more credibility, more clarity. Yes, you will. Once I have this book done. And often when we're coming from this place, we are so passionate about getting out there and getting that real work done. Y'all, I love this. But truly, slowing down a little bit is very, very often going to help make you a much, much stronger candidate for all three of those goals. Anything you are trying to do, when you slow down and find the clarity in yourself, when you look for the joy, the connection that you have to that process, that is actually integral to those relationships you want to build. So we've got to step away from this idea that having this eventual outcome means we've got to push through the book. That's not true. By slowing down, you are not admitting defeat. You are not saying that you're going to put this off for 5 years, 10 years. Rather, you are understanding, with the wisdom that comes along with this process, frankly, that sometimes creative expression takes some time, but that the most important part is that it's authentic and genuine to you, and that it comes from a place of joy and honest connection. So if you are somebody like that, oh, you are a person after my heart, I hope you'll reach out and chat with me, because that really is what we specialize in at Page and Podium, helping folks use that book to build their thought leadership, to build their business, if that's what you're doing, to build their speaking, and ultimately to help others. I often find the third most common culprit is that folks are comparing themselves to someone else. Now, oh my gosh, this is so close to my heart, because I absolutely get this sense of external comparison, that no matter where we are in this life, we always want to be somewhere else, and there's always someone that got there before us. It makes it so infuriating sometimes, because we want to be at that next stage. But unfortunately, the more we try to compare ourselves to others, the more we try to use that to push through, to make ourselves into something like that person we admire, the more we actually lose the connection that's going to pull our readers in. My friend Sarah from grad school had a really cute way of saying this, and I think about it from time to time. She would always say, "Eyes on your own paper." And if you have been through grad school, I suspect you will know exactly why she was saying that. Grad school is rife with competition. Everyone is competing with everyone else all the time. And the worst part is there are actual benchmarks that you can compare yourself on. Sometimes you even are compared within the program. So what does this mean? Well, when we are thinking about keeping our eyes on our own paper, what we are focused on is not how we measure up to other people, but rather how we measure up to who we are. We can look at our own paper, we can look at our own progress, and really know for certain that we've come a long way. And y'all, I've never seen anybody get 5 or 6 chapters into their memoir and not understand that they have made huge strides, let alone 15, 20 chapters. You are growing. So if pushing through is some effort to meet somebody else where they are, let me just encourage you to focus on your own paper. Your growth is what is encouraging your individuality, your unique expression, your creativity. And those are the things people actually want. So what we need to focus on is the way that we are going to honor this process. Lean into the process of writing your memoir, because truly, as you move through that process, the level of clarity, the level of direction and purpose that you will gain will truly blow your mind. But you know when that won't happen is when you're pushing through. Okay, if anything I've said here has resonated, if you would like to have some of this kind accountability that really helps you diagnose what's going on so that you not only can finish this product, but continue to be productive in a way that feels genuine, that feels expressive, that really feels like who you are, I would love to help. That's what I do best. Reach out at pageandpodium.com/contact. In these about hour-long meetings, I sit with people and hear about their story. I want to hear what your goals are, what you're hoping to achieve. We'll figure out where some of those issues are for you and figure out how you can move forward with some actual concrete advice, some real direction that does not require you to leave yourself out the door and push through, but rather really hones in on how magical it is when we can get in touch with ourselves and really bring that sense of authentic expression to our readers. I promise it's gonna feel so much better, even if it takes a little bit longer. So, y'all, let's focus on process, let's stop pushing through, and happy writing. Most memoirs don't stall because of lack of time. Most memoirs stall because of lack of clarity. And that's why I put together the Memoir Method Checklist. The idea here is to give you every single step in the process, not because that makes it easy, of course not, but because no project is ever completed until you know what the steps in the process actually are. You can download it free at pageandpodium.com/checklist.